Ah, that's lovely. Everyone's just falling in. Brilliant. Okay, I think that's started. Um, Thank you for joining us today. It's great to have so many of you from different organisations register to explore more about supporting the bone health of colleagues and team members. I'm Claire Glynn, the Clinical Operations Director for PAM Physio Solutions, and with me today I have Laura Jordan, who is the Corporate Health and Wellbeing Director for PAM Wellness, who as an organisation provides nutrition services and blood testing services to help companies identify and reduce health risks.
Good morning.
So today we'll be sharing some findings with you from our latest research report named the MSK Musculoskeletal Trends Report 2024, Nipping It in the Bud. This looks at the underlying issues driving MSK absence and how poor bone health is impacting sickness absence and productivity. We'll also be looking at the importance of nutrition, ergonomics, and reducing sedentary behaviour for boosting bone health, how to create a culture that promotes a healthy workplace for bones, and how to support employees struggling with their bone health. And we'll also have a Q&A at the end. You'll see here a quite concerning stat on this slide that we identified, in which our report established that 1 in 8 absences, that's 13%, are related to broken bones. Let's have a look at the key findings then. So as we highlighted just now, 1 in 8 people who are off sick from work are absent due to a broken bone. NHS delays are unfortunately impacting recovery and return to normal or preferred function. And this is because the delays in rehab mean that the recovery is harder and actually then has less influence on the overall long-term recovery. Just 53% of employees referred to occupational health for advice and support after a month of absence are back to work a month later. And concerningly, we found that typically 2/3 of absent employees are only referred into occupational health musculoskeletal services once they've been off sick for over a month. To add to this, if the employee isn't referred until after 6 months of absence, then the likelihood of them returning within a month reduces even further. We found that just 18% of employees referred after 6 months of absence are expected to be back in work a month after their referral. Let's talk about bones, what they are and why they're so important. So bones play many roles in the body. They provide structure, they protect organs, including the heart, the lungs and the brain from injury. They anchor muscles and store calcium and vital minerals that we need to live. So bone tissue is alive and your bones are continuously changing. New bone is made and old bone is broken down. So you can think of bone density as a bank account where you can make deposits and withdrawals. When you are young, your body makes new bone faster than it breaks down the old bone, and your bone mass therefore increases. So strong bones or a healthy bank account begins in childhood. Most people will reach their peak bone mass around the age of 30. And after that, bone remodeling continues, but you lose slightly more bone mass than you gain. So you're making withdrawals. While it's important to build strong and healthy bones during childhood and as adolescence, you can take steps during adulthood to protect bone health and add deposits to the bank too. And this is with good habits and medical attention when needed. We can have strong bones throughout our lives. So, we're going to look at 4 of the key factors that can help bone health, including the importance of getting vitamin D and eating the right foods, being active with the right types of physical activity, and other lifestyle factors such as working posture. And these factors can help bones to stay strong and healthy and reduce the risk of developing poor bone health conditions, including such as osteoporosis and fractures or broken bones. The good news is that you're never too old or too young to improve your bone health. Over to Laura.
Awesome, thank you, Claire. So as Claire said at the start of the session, I sit within our wellness and our health and wellness department. So I just want to take you through really the importance of calcium and vitamin D, really from a kind of scientific, but also a lifestyle perspective as well. And we'll run through some of the nutrition elements there. So many of you will probably know that calcium and vitamin D are essential nutrients for maintaining strong and healthy bones throughout life. Most of us know that calcium, particularly found in milk, cheese, nuts, and soy, is important for strong bones. But without vitamin D, we can't absorb that calcium. So they play crucial roles individually, but also in tandem to support bone development, bone density, and overall skeletal health. So what I want to do is just break down calcium and vitamin D for a start, and then actually look at them together in synergy. So first and foremost, if we have a look at calcium, this is a major building block when it comes to our bone health. And in fact, about 99% of the calcium in our bodies is stored in the bones and teeth. And it provides the structure and hardness that our bones need to support our bodies and withstand everyday stresses. It's really key for bone development. So particularly, as kind of Claire was alluding to earlier, it's never too kind of, you know, never too early or late to looking after our bone health. Particularly that development is really key during childhood and adolescence when those bones are growing rapidly. Calcium is particularly important for that development. But adequate calcium intake during these years and beyond will help to ensure that bones really do reach their optimal strength and density by that early adulthood. We've already heard Claire mention osteoporosis, and this is a condition that's characterised by weak and brittle bones, which is often associated with aging. However, a diet that's rich in calcium combined with other lifestyle factors like regular exercise, and we'll come on to this a little bit later on, can help to build up and maintain bone density, which reduces that risk in later life. And lastly, calcium also plays a really crucial role in nerve function, nerve transmission, muscular function, and also blood clotting as well. Because interestingly, when the blood calcium levels drop too low, the body will actually draw calcium from the bones to maintain normal functions, potentially leading to that bone weakening over time. If I just move on to having a look at vitamin D, as I mentioned earlier, this is really crucial when it comes to the absorption of calcium from the digestive system into the bloodstream. Without enough vitamin D, even if you're consuming plenty of calcium, your body might not be able to absorb it as effectively. Particularly as well, vitamin D can help to regulate calcium and phosphorus levels in the blood, which are critical for maintaining those healthy bones. And in addition to its role in bone health, vitamin D is also important for muscular function. So weak muscles can lead to an increased risk of falls and fractures, especially in older adults. Now, I mentioned that there's a really important synergy or a relationship between calcium and vitamin D, and they do work together in tandem. Particularly, vitamin D helps the body to absorb calcium from the foods that we eat. So without enough vitamin D, calcium absorption decreases. And as I said earlier, even if you're consuming adequate amounts of calcium, without that vitamin D, we're not going to be able to absorb it as efficiently. Deficiencies as well in either nutrient can lead to problems with bone health. For example, inadequate calcium intake can impair that bone development that we saw kind of in the early ages and increase that risk of osteoporosis, whilst vitamin D deficiency can lead to soft and brittle bones, also known as rickets in children. And we also have to consider sunlight as well, which I don't know where you are in the world today, but there's definitely no sun where I am near Milton Keynes. Particularly, our bodies can produce vitamin D when it's exposed to sunlight. However, particularly factors such as geographical location, time of the year, cloud coverage, and skin pigmentation can affect this process. So, particularly in regions with limited sunlight, dietary sources of vitamin D will actually become really important. And I'll talk about those in a second. But most adults in the UK will probably be deficient in vitamin D, particularly this time of year, kind of those winter months between October and March. So the government does actually recommend that everybody take a vitamin D supplement within the month, in the winter months, and particularly if you're already taking a calcium supplement, it might be worth just having a look at a vitamin D supplement there as well for that absorption piece. But just to finish off before I hand back to Claire, just to give you some dietary sources, particularly for calcium and vitamin D. Obviously, with calcium, the main ones that we will nod towards are things like our dairy products, such as milk, cheese, yogurt. They're going to be rich sources of calcium. But other sources will also include leafy green vegetables such as kale and broccoli, almonds, sardines, and also fortified foods such as orange juice or breakfast cereals. And then lastly, obviously, I've mentioned earlier that vitamin D, its primary sources from sunshine, but from our food groups, particularly look at sources like fatty fish, so things like salmon, mackerel, tuna, eggs, beef liver, and also fortified foods, again, like milk, orange juice cereals. They're all great sources of vitamin D. I'll hand you back to Claire.
Thank you, Laura. Learning a lot about food sources of the natural things there. So what else can we do? Hopefully it kind of goes without saying, but exercise. So just to reiterate, like muscle, bone is living tissue and it responds to exercise by becoming stronger. So being physically active helps to keep bones strong, or as we like to say, bones stay strong if you give them work to do, or use it or lose it. So exercise offers lots of benefits for the bones. In particular, we're talking specifically about weight bearing and impact exercise and resistance exercise as well. So these help to build strong bones, prevent bone loss, and strengthen the muscles as well. And then exercise to improve balance also helps to prevent falls, which then subsequently reduces the risk of fractures. So weight bearing and impact exercise, what's that? It's on your feet. It produces a loading force through the bones, which helps to stimulate bone growth. So the types of exercise might include lower impact activity, and that's walking, brisk walking, marching on the spot, and even going up and down the stairs. Then there's moderate impact activities, which include some jumping. This could be dancing, jogging, running, tennis or badminton, skipping, and even just stamping your feet. And then, of course, we've got the high impact activities, which include a lot of jumping. So this could include basketball, volleyball, star jumps, and even just jumping up and down on the spot. So as a side note, activities such as swimming and cycling, although they are very important activities and very healthy activities, they're not weight-bearing exercises. So when it comes to these kind of activities, what prescription are we recommending? How often should we be doing this type of activity? Well, the recommendations are for a minimum of 3 times per week. The good news is that the body actually only requires around 50 impacts to have a positive impact on bone health, and that can typically be achieved in 10 minutes. So the key is to choose the right level of impact activity for you. High impact activity places the greatest stress on your bones. Hopefully that's understandable. So these are unlikely to be suitable for you if you have osteoporosis or if you aren't used to exercising. Or if you feel that you're not physically strong, then making some simple changes, such as avoiding prolonged periods of sitting down and sedentary behaviour, and instead standing up for a few minutes every hour, that can make a real difference. So then we mentioned resistance exercise or strength training as it can be more commonly known. What's this? It's using muscles to work against a weight or resistance. So the muscle tendons pull on the bones, which help to build the bone strength. And the types of resistance exercise, some examples it simply includes adding resistance into your chosen exercise, which could be weight machines or free weights or resistance bands. And you can be inventive and use items readily available at home, such as bags of food or shopping, or your own body weight as resistance, such as performing pull-ups or press-ups. And the recommendation for how often we should do this is 2 or more days per week, but always on non-consecutive days, and that includes all major muscle groups for roughly 30 minutes per day. Now, balance training is especially important for older adults because improving balance helps prevent falls. So we're talking about walking on an unstable surface, for example, a foam mat or a wobble board. Tai Chi is a great activity, walking backwards, and then even just shifting your body weight backwards and forwards while in standing with both feet together or on one foot. And then finally, let's talk about posture. Occupational related activity can often involve repetitive loading or sustained exertions on the body, which can negatively impact bone health and bone development, particularly if those activities are in awkward or uncomfortable postures. So it is important to ensure working postures are ergonomic and comfortable to the user in order to maintain healthy bones. So, who are our at risk groups? Let's first look at older adults, menopausal people, and the sedentary population, and those who are unable to work ergonomically. Silently and without warning, bones may begin to weaken early in life if you're not engaging in healthy bone activities. Many people are making lifestyle choices that can lead to weak bones organically, or they already have weak bones and just don't know it. Some people are at higher risk of developing poor bone health or sustaining fractures than others. It is important to consider each demographic group and each individual to understand the risks. So, as people get older, their risk of osteoporosis rises. Osteoporosis, as Laura explained, is a disease that causes bones to become weak and brittle, which then increases the risk of fractures. So, older adults also tend to lose muscle mass, which is called sarcopenia, and we need strong muscles to help us balance and reduce the risk of falling and consequently breaking bones. Menopause is a stage in the female hormone life cycle where estrogen levels reduce. Estrogen is a hormone that helps with bone health. Perimenopause can begin as early as 35, with the average age of menopause being 50. And the first 8 years of menopause are shown to have the greatest decline in bone health for menopausal women. So, depending on the balance of the bone mass bank account that a person has as they enter menopause, can determine how much risk the menopause bone mass withdrawal would have. And of course, as we spoke about people who are particularly sedentary inside and outside of work, and people who are working in ergonomically poor postures. And over to
Fab.
Laura.
Thanks, Claire. So I think there's a really important point there, I think, which is worth just taking away, particularly around, as we get older, particularly if we are female and we will experience inevitably, menopause through our lifestyle. It's really, sorry, throughout our lifetime, I should say. It's really important just to focus on, well, what can we do in our lifestyle? What are the things that we can be focused on sooner rather than later to actually help us to have a healthier aging kind of years. So what I want to do is just focus firstly on some lifestyle factors, and then we'll move on to looking at certain medications. So particularly lifestyle factors such as smoking, excessive alcohol consumption, and chronic stress can have significant impacts on bone health. So understanding these effects is really crucial for individuals who are looking to maintain strong and healthy bones throughout their lives. And hopefully that's all of you on today's call. So if I just break it down, if we look at smoking first and foremost, this will have an impact on kind of four key areas. The first one being bone density. So, smoking has been linked to a lower bone density, especially in women, and this is due to several reasons. The first, as Claire's already alluded to, is that estrogen. So, particularly smoking can lead to an earlier onset of menopause in women, and this actually results in lower estrogen levels. And because, as Claire's already mentioned, estrogen plays a vital role in maintaining bone density, that lower estrogen can actually accelerate bone loss, increasing the risk of osteoporosis. We also need to consider the toxic chemicals that are in cigarettes, such as nicotine, which can interfere with the body's ability to absorb calcium, which I just talked about earlier. And then we need to think about inflammation from smoking. Smoking will cause inflammation throughout the body, which can negatively impact bone health by disrupting that normal process of bone remodeling and bone repair. So that's some kind of really important factors there, particularly around smoking and smoking cessation. We can also consider excessive alcohol consumption. So here, particularly heavy alcohol consumption can interfere with that body's ability to form new bone tissue. And this is particularly true when alcohol intake is quite high over a prolonged period of time. Alcohol will also interfere with the absorption of calcium and vitamin, again, as we heard earlier. So it's kind of creeping back up again. It can also disrupt hormone levels related to bone health. So again, reducing those levels of estrogen can again lead to that disruption of bone density. And lastly, that excessive alcohol consumption, we know it can impair balance and coordination, which increases the risk of falls and fractures and might become significantly more dangerous, particularly in older adults and older populations as well. And then the third thing just to look at when we look at lifestyle choices is stress and chronic stress. So particularly prolonged stress can lead to increases of cortisol, which is our body's primary stress hormone. And elevated cortisol levels can again interfere with bone formation and remodeling. High cortisol levels can also inhibit the production of osteoblasts, which are the cells responsible for building new bone tissue. And again, this imbalance can lead to a decreased bone density and an increased risk of osteoporosis. And then lastly, stress can also affect digestion. It can affect the way that we digest our food, and we might notice kind of signs and symptoms similar to IBS. And this can actually impact nutrient absorption. So again, going back to that calcium and vitamin D that we talked about earlier, which again can potentially reduce the availability of those key nutrients needed for bone health. So just a few key takeaways from me there before I move on to looking at medications. The first and probably obvious one is if you do smoke, do consider smoking cessation. So do consider quitting because it can have numerous health benefits, including your bone health. Do limit or be mindful of alcohol consumption, particularly within the UK. It's recommended that both men and women have no more than 14 units of alcohol per week and at least 2 to 3 consecutive alcohol-free days. And the last point is stress management. Do try and engage in stress reducing activities such as yoga or Tai Chi, which again, we heard earlier is actually really good for balance. So could be a bit of a double whammy there, which is quite helpful. Even things like meditation, deep breathing exercises, or kind of hobbies that we enjoy and activities that we can just switch off from. And then the last point just to consider here is several medications can affect bone health, either by decreasing bone density, which again we've heard already can lead to osteoporosis, or by increasing the risk of fractures. So just some typical medications that can decrease bone density include drugs that might be used to treat inflammatory conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis and asthma. There's also anticonvulsants, which I can't say on a Tuesday morning, that can be used to treat seizures. So again, specifically, they will impact that vitamin D metabolism, which is again essential for that calcium absorption and bone health. And likewise, medication that treat conditions such as acid reflux, interestingly, can also interfere with that absorption of calcium as well. So particularly if you are in one of these at-risk groups that we've just talked about earlier, maybe being an older adult, menopausal, somebody who is very sedentary or maybe not working ergonomically, or maybe indulging in maybe some of those poor lifestyle choices, it's just worth being mindful that if we are on certain medication, they could affect your bone health. So do obviously speak to your healthcare provider or your GP. They may recommend bone density testing, lifestyle changes, supplements, or even adjustment to medications as well. So what I want to do is, now that we're aware of those at-risk groups, I want to just have a look at what we can do as a workforce to help create a culture that supports the overall health and well-being of our employees, but focusing specifically on bone health. So it's really important within our working environments that first and foremost, we make sure that people are working ergonomically. I don't know if any of you remember when obviously we first heard COVID, we went into lockdown and it was a novelty working from home. And I don't know about Claire, but I was certainly on Teams calls with people who were kind of hunched over the desks or working in their beds, some crazy ergonomical setups. So, particularly if we are hybrid or we're hot desking, whatever it may well be, just get back to basics and make sure that you are set up in the correct manner for you. So do consider working on it ergonomically. Do look at getting a DSE assessment. Obviously, you can have those through PAM, which we can talk more at the end, but just think about getting back to basics first and foremost. It's important as well that we're encouraging employees to stay active, as you heard from Claire earlier in terms of exercise, balance, posture. So do try and support this through kind of your workforce, whether it is walking meetings. I do a lot of walk and talks if I can at lunchtime, just to kind of get out and about. Even if you're working in offices, a lot of the ways that offices are set up is you might have bathrooms on different floors. So just trying to get up and use a bathroom that might be 2 flights of stairs up, just so that you're walking a little bit more. And a lot of us as well have actually probably cut out the only real exercise that we did on a daily basis, which was commuting. So a lot of people, again, might be working remotely or hybrid roles. So if that is the case, you might not be actually, walking to things like the car, the train station, whatever it may well be. So just try and consider how you can be a little bit more active, maybe even building in a bit of a, fake commute into your working day. You've heard me talk a lot about nutrition and calcium, I think, so far today. So it's really important just to focus on nutrition and, again, as a workforce, allowing opportunities for people to eat well. So whether that be encouraging lunch breaks, perhaps looking at education on eating well, even eating well for less as well, because that can be quite overwhelming for some people, but also educational sessions, even just like this session, so people understand, the risks to their bone health, such as that vitamin D deficiency, smoking, menopause, and so on. Do try and lead by example. So particularly if you're in a leadership or a management role, lead by that example and try and, practice what we're preaching. So taking regular breaks for movement throughout the day, maybe going on a walk in your lunch break, even something as simple as trying to stand during a call, just to try and break up that time that we're sat sedentary. And last but by no means least, just know what support you've got available to you. Particularly if you as an individual or even as a workforce are worried about bone health, particularly women will actually have a higher risk of being diagnosed with osteoporosis, then think about what support you do have, such as occupational health, DSE assessments, MSK specialists. Look what you've already got in your toolbox, again, just to support your employee health.
Thank you, Laura. We're going to have a look at how you, potentially as a manager or a colleague, can help support an employee after a broken bone. So an employee who has sustained a broken bone is likely to have additional needs at work. And as an employer, you do have a duty to make reasonable adjustments within the workplace to accommodate the individual's needs. So we want to support the consideration of reasonable adjustments. There's typically no reason why a person with poor bone health or a fracture can't be helped to stay in work safely. So have a look at what their work involves and what's needed to support them. It could be dictation software or potentially even a different role. It was quite funny when Laura was talking about the first stages of lockdown and people working in strange places, and we actually had people working on iron boards. Unbelievably, because an ironing board changes height. So that apparently was a logical response. So that dictation software is something that could be achieved through a DSE. And understanding what people might need to allow them to continue to do their roles. What do we actually mean by reasonable adjustments? So have a discussion about a return to work plan. Someone may need time off to attend medical appointments, confirm that their area is a suitable workstation and allows appropriate ergonomics, and consider support to manage pain at work, such as the opportunity to vary tasks and positions. Gradual phasing is more likely to be needed after a plaster cast is removed. That would enable time to engage in prescribed exercises and build tolerance to work activities while soft tissues recover. But ultimately, don't delay. There is and has been a common trend to wait until any fracture has fully healed before seeking any kind of intervention or treatment. But there's a lot that can be done to help in the earlier stages of a fracture or broken bone. Of course, broken bones can happen due to all sorts of incidents or accidents, but wrist fractures, hip fractures, and fractures of the vertebrae in the spine are the most common type of breaks that people with osteoporosis experience. So having osteoporosis doesn't automatically mean that your bones will break, but it does mean you have a higher chance of breaking a bone if you have a bump or a simple fall. There are usually no warnings that you've developed osteoporosis, and it's often only diagnosed following a fracture or even a series of minor falls. So it's important to be aware that a broken bone injury can sometimes lead to a diagnosis of osteoporosis. Okay, so we've got a bit of a case study, a case example here for you. We've got Marilyn. Marilyn is a 42-year-old senior caseworker working full time. She's a female, and she's fallen from standing, and she's fractured her wrist just at the base of her thumb, and she's remained off work. So she's had a referral through to occupational health, and she's had a management referral. During this management referral, there was detected fragility fracture concerns, so she was signposted to a GP for investigations, and also she was advised for having a DSE as well. There were lifestyle risk factors in Marilyn's case as well. She was a smoker and she led a sedentary lifestyle both inside and outside of work. So Marilyn undertook a DSE. She received adapted equipment, including dictation software, and that minimised her typing. And she was also recommended a vertical or an ambidextrous mouse, either or would suit, and that enabled her an earlier return to work. She was also recommended the PHIL service, which is the physiotherapy information line here at PAM Physio Solutions, and that allowed her to access prescribed exercises which aided her strength improvement and her range of movement in her joint of her wrist following the removal of her cast. And she was also prescribed balance exercises as well. You can see that also wellness coaching was prescribed. So I'll hand over to Laura, who'll be able to explain what the wellness coaching is.
Fab. So, as Claire said, particularly with this individual, it was identified that in their lifestyle, as we've already heard, smoker and sedentary lifestyle. And again, as we've learned in today's session, they are risk factors. So we really wanted to support Marilyn with actually thinking about, well, what can she do to actually not only support recovery, but actually understand how she can reduce risks through her lifestyle of this happening again. So we actually conducted one-to-one wellness coaching. So this was it was over a 12-week coaching program. We actually did 10 weeks in the end with this individual, simply due to summer holidays, which is very exciting. And we've really focused through those sessions. They range from 30 minutes to an hour, really focused on nutrition. So teaching Marilyn about nutrition for not only recovery, but again, a little bit about what we talked about earlier with regards to calcium and vitamin D. So we were looking at analysing food diaries, teaching Marilyn about food groups, and then also giving some guidance, but also some encouragement of physical activity for bone health. So really echoing what Claire's team are prescribing, but also just trying to support that through that resistance exercise and basic things such as trying to break up that sedentary lifestyle for bone health. Obviously, there's a lot going on, so we also did a 12-piece smoking cessation program as well to support Marilyn and just give her options for exploring quitting smoking for good and reducing her cigarette intake over that period as well. So a lot to support this individual with, and really focusing, I think, on a bit of a biopsychosocial model of support, which we will come on to a little bit later on.
And we can say as well that Marilyn had a really successful intervention there, and she took everything really well on board. So her risk factor scoring has dropped significantly. Okay, so managers. Managers play a pivotal role in promoting bone health and supporting employees with poor bone health, such as following a fracture, or those with osteoporosis. So managers should understand how the employee's limitations affect job performance and identify specific tasks that are problematic for the employee or their colleague. Looking at what adjustments are available to reduce or eliminate these problems. Has the worker been asked about possible accommodations that they believe may help, but also ask occupational health for professional advice? Employers are ultimately responsible for making reasonable adjustments, and regular contact throughout recovery is advised once accommodations are in place and someone's gone back to work. And how often should you meet with an employee to evaluate their effectiveness and determine whether additional support is needed? This is going to change. So there's going to be changing needs as an individual progresses through recovery. So that needs to be as often as needed. And I'd always say that more is better, and making sure that that communication and trust and transparency is always there with an individual.
Fabulous. So I'm just going to finish this off. I obviously mentioned this word biopsychosocial in the earlier slide, but particularly when this model is applied to musculoskeletal conditions, it does recognise that they're influenced by a combination of biological, psychological, and social factors. And I think you've probably got that from today's session, where there's a lot to kind of pack into a 45-minute session. And particularly MSK conditions or musculoskeletal conditions, such as whether it's back pain, risk of osteoporosis, repetitive strain injuries, or even joint disorders, they can have complex origins, but also impacts on that employee's health and work performance. So particularly with the case, with Marilyn, for example, we weren't just looking at supporting that individual with that fragility fracture, but it's actually, well, how can we support this individual from more of a holistic perspective, actually providing that DSE, providing that full service when that cast has been removed, but then really thinking about, well, how do we actually support that person's recovery, but also long term, what support can we give them to actually reduce this risk? So I just want to focus here on, well, what can occupational health actually add, and particularly, PAM group support for that. I think the first one is just to touch about is those, or are those, I should say, holistic assessments and that holistic viewpoint. So particularly through management referrals, that will actually enable you to consider not just biomechanical, but also psychological and social aspects of that MSK issue. And the outcomes may include things like the ergonomic evaluations, physical examinations, maybe even mental health screenings, particularly if it's stress-related factors, or evaluations of the workplace dynamics. There could even be physical health interventions, so particularly addressing that biological impact. It may well be that that support provides treatment and interventions for MSK conditions, which may be that kind of manual, if you like, physiotherapy or occupational therapy, or even just supporting people with regards to what are their vulnerabilities and are there any kind of effects there with their medication, which can be reviewed. We also need to consider that psychological support as well, because these two, factors, physical and psychological, will go hand in hand, and there are psychological impacts, particularly when it comes to things like chronic pain and musculoskeletal issues. So being able to understand what that person's behaviours and emotions are, and what kind of coping skills they already have within their toolbox, it may well be that employees dealing with MSK conditions might benefit in tandem from counselling, cognitive behavioural therapy for pain management, or even stress reduction techniques, either through kind of psychological teams or wellbeing teams. I mentioned earlier about, having DSE assessments. So really being aware of what your working space and your environment looks like, and having that ergonomic assessment to actually identify and address the risk factors such as poor posture, repetitive motions, or even things like improper lifting techniques as well. And then actually looking at educational workshops that can be provided, which may cover things like stress management strategies, coping mechanisms for employees, particularly dealing with chronic pain. And then lastly, we have things like the return to work plans, which Claire's mentioned earlier, in terms of being mindful of not only physical limitations, but also psychological readiness and any workplace modifications. And finally, really promoting that physical activity within the workplace, as we saw right from the get-go actually of today's sessions, just to try and mitigate the risk of kind of poor bone health. So really, by addressing that kind of biological, the psychological and social aspects, really when it comes to any condition, but obviously in this case, musculoskeletal conditions, that holistic model really does recognise that effective management and prevention of these issues will really require people to go beyond traditional medical treatments and actually have an all-encompassing model that supports not only injury risk, but also can improve that recovery outcome, and ultimately promote a healthier and a more productive workforce as well. So hopefully this just tries to tie a few things together in terms of where occupational health can kind of add and where it can support, but also not just treating, what we see on paper, but actually looking at this from a much more holistic perspective. So I just want to kind of wrap up and give you a few key takeaways. A lot to pack in today's session, but hopefully some of the key takeaways, if we just kind of think back to today, we really kicked off by looking at nutrition first and foremost, and that role that calcium and vitamin D play, particularly when they're working in synergy. A lot of us will associate kind of bone health with calcium, but don't forget that actually vitamin D is really important to absorb that calcium from the foods that we eat. So do look at those kind of dietary sources such as the fish, the eggs, the fortified foods that we talked earlier. But again, your greatest kind of source of vitamin D is going to be sunlight. So that is a nice segue for activity. Do try and get out if you can, within your lunch breaks, even first thing in the morning, in that first light, just trying to build in a little bit more activity, particularly if your working dynamic has changed over the last few years, and you maybe think, okay, I am a little bit more sedentary. I am working at home a lot, or I am, driving in my car to the office, then I sit down again. So do think about how you can be more active, but be creative with it as well. Have standing meetings, standing phone calls. If you are fortunate to have a standing desk, do utilize it a little bit more. Thirdly, consider risks. So obviously we talked about older adults, maybe menopausal women, potentially people who are very sedentary, they're not working ergonomically, lifestyle choices, but also medication. So if you are in one of those at-risk groups, do start to think about, what are some of the things that you can do to actually mitigate your risks of, any kind of, breaks or kind of weakened bones as we get older. Get back to basics as well with those ergonomics. So if you haven't had a DSE assessment before, or you haven't had one in a long time, then do reach out, to your line manager or through occupational health to get that DSE assessment. And then that will open up the door then for you in terms of learning about what adjustments are available for you, either when you are kind of in good health, or obviously as a manager, if you are supporting an employee after a broken bone, be mindful of some of those adjustments that Claire walked us through earlier. What I want to do at this point is really just open up the floor for any kind of questions that people may well have. So if you do have kind of any questions at all that you'd like to ask, please just pop them through into the chat box and we'll take those for you. But just while some of you can maybe have a think about your question or as you write it on, if I just move on to the next slide, I just want to highlight some of the kind of useful resources for you that are available. So as Claire mentioned kind of right from the get-go about a recently published article, if you head to pamgroup.co.uk/insights, you'll be able to access the MSK Trends 2024 report. Obviously, by all means, if you wish to sign up for our newsletter, you can do. But there is actually a really helpful poster with lots of different tips to actually look at ways to reduce your risk of breakages. So do have a look at that. Definitely, certainly a handy takeaway for the workplace. And if you are on socials, then you can obviously get in contact with us through LinkedIn. The handle there is People Asset Management Limited. And obviously you can keep an eye on anything that we've got up and coming as well. Oh, we do have questions coming through. Here we go. So I will answer the first and the nice easy one, which is, can we have the slides from today? Absolutely. This session is being recorded. So do look back on that Insights page after today's session and you'll find that this recording will be there ready for you. I've just questions which Claire, you'll be delighted to know, are probably more for me. So, so let me just have a quick look. So, do additional vitamin D and calcium tablets help? If so, what's the minimum amount that you should be taking? So, typically, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but the dosage that you can buy over the counter is actually more than sufficient. So, if you go into, your local Tesco, Boots, whatever the case may well be, you can actually buy the combined calcium and vitamin D supplements. So whatever you can buy over the counter, I can't remember the micrograms off the top of my head, but that is really sufficient for any population. My mother-in-law was delighted recently when she broke her ankle and I came round with a handful rattling of supplements. So that would be your adequate daily kind of calcium intake. And Belinda, hopefully that answers your question for you as well. So over the counter, what you can get from your local kind of Boots, Tesco's, whatever pharmacy will be absolutely fine. I'm just going to look at another couple of questions. I've got one, Claire, that's probably good for you. So what kind of activity would help to protect against wrist fractures? So quite a specific question.
It is. I mean, the joys and beauty of the wrist is it's a relatively complex joint because there are lots of bones in there and there are lots of therefore joints in there, but it's about that impact activity. So anything that uses rackets or anything that's about catching and throwing balls, again, anything such as pull-ups or press-ups are going to put impact through. So again, it's about that weight bearing, whether it's open chain or closed chain. And closed chain means that we've got contact with the floor or a wall. And open chain would be anything that's allowing movement. So anything that's got ball contact, racket contact, or pull-ups, press-ups would really, really help with wrist strength, wrist joint strength, and the bones of the wrist as well. Hopefully a nice short answer there for you.
Ace, thank you, Claire. I've got another one for me actually. So I've just lost it. Oh, here we go, from Anne. So you state calcium foods, but what if you're vegan, as most of these are animal products? Brilliant question, and I'm really glad you've asked. So the first thing is soy foods, for example. So maybe even things like soya milk is very useful, and then even soya beans. You've also got your food groups, like mainly good sources of fiber and protein, but particularly beans, peas, and lentils are also very good sources of calcium. I mentioned nuts earlier as well, so particularly almonds are especially rich in calcium. Seeds as well, so even just sprinkling kind of chia or flax seeds, maybe adding it to salads and I'm a bit of a sucker for porridge, so adding it into porridge is also very useful as well. And you can also find it, interestingly, in, like I mentioned earlier, kind of your leafy greens and certain vegetables. So seaweed is actually a good source of calcium, but also your cruciferous vegetables are rich in calcium. So things like dark leafy greens, like your broccoli and kale. So hopefully enough kind of food groups for you to take there. Claire, there's another actually question which might be quite useful for you. Do you have a DSE questionnaire that we can share?
So we have the online Get Free DSE, and if you literally type in www.getfreedse.co.uk or .com, I can't remember which one it is. It was on one of the previous slides, and that's our sort of online DSE portal that is free to use. It is based on the HSE questionnaire, and it has recommendations and hints and tips in there as well, and there's a video, so absolutely feel free to have a look at that one. Like I say, there is a link on one of the slides. I think it's 2 slides earlier, just a little link in there for where you can have a look at that. Absolutely.
Fab. I actually have got another question which I seem to have missed, so apologies. But one from Carol. Can vitamin D be absorbed through a head of hair if you're waxed? Let me read that again. That was terribly done. Can vitamin D be absorbed through a head of hair if you're wearing a factor 50? Yes, obviously sunscreen will prevent your skin from absorbing kind of those benefits from the sun. And I'm obviously advocating, like, do wear sunscreen. I'm certainly not advocating that you take that off for any kind of time at all. So do obviously wear your sunscreen. Just getting out in daylight can be very helpful for you anyway, because yes, you will absorb the sun. You know, by all means, if you know that you have a low vitamin D already and you can get, you know, blood tests for this, then it doesn't hurt to take that vitamin D supplement. But try and get as many of those natural sources as you can, whether it is through foods, but also whether it's through just getting out about in the sunlight as well. I'm just going to have a quick look and see if there's any more. We've got a couple more questions actually, Claire. Again, I've got another one for you, which I'll hand over so people can have a break from my dulcet tones. But is there anything that can help stop disc degeneration in the neck region, e.g., any exercises, or is it primarily posture changes?
Gosh, that's quite a leading question, that one. It depends on the reason for disc degeneration. The word, I'm not a fan of the words disc degeneration as a physiotherapist, because everyone past the age of 30 has a level of degeneration ongoing because the body can't keep up with itself in terms of regeneration. So degeneration could be a consequence of osteoarthritic changes, inflammatory changes, dehydration, lifestyle, or indeed posture. So my advice for that would be to find out what the causes of your degeneration is. Always, I would say that in terms of the symptoms as a consequence for degeneration, is going to be strengthening and conditioning and flexibility, and certainly some postural improvements as well if there are postural influences. In terms of the actual deterioration of discs, there's kind of a biomechanical change that is occurring in everyone's body. The rate at which that degeneration occurs can be controlled, but again, without knowing the reason behind it, I wouldn't want to start getting too clinical and too into that at all. So yeah, speak to your healthcare professional, find out what's going on.
Thanks, Claire. And then just the last one, I think, for me. So are liquid forms of vitamin D more easily absorbed by the body? So what I would say is I wouldn't say more easily. I would actually answer it by saying they are more quickly absorbed. Reason being is because your body's not having to break down anything first and foremost to actually absorb those nutrients. So yeah, nice short answer that yes, any sort of kind of supplement which is in a fluid form will be less to break down and therefore more easily absorbed.
I've just had a quick scan up to the top and I can see that Fiona has asked a question as well that I think we've just unfortunately missed. So Fiona, can I ask if people with osteoarthritis are more susceptible to osteoporosis? Osteoarthritis is not a predisposing factor to osteoporosis. However, they do have very similar risk factors. So osteoarthritis is about the lining of joints. and the effect of within the joint and the effect that has on bone, whereas the osteoporosis is the actual density of the bone itself. But the risk factors to both are very, very similar, if not equal. So if you have osteoarthritis, it's really good advice to start to try and look at the lifestyle, the behaviors, what's kind of going on in your unique body that is unique to yourself, and what changes you can do to avoid those risk factors then transferring over to osteoporotic behaviors.
Thanks, Claire. Good spot. There's one more for you, which I'm gonna divert your way again, if that's all right. So, what kind of activity would help to protect against hip fracture? Would it be using stairs, walking, etc.? And that's from Richard.
Absolutely. The hip is a major weight-bearing joint. Walking on uneven surfaces, walking up and down hills, running if you do enjoy running, and it doesn't have to be on a hard surface. So if you like running on I used a lot of fell walking and cross-country running, and that always really helps. So really strengthening all the hips and the buttocks and the groin area really helps with that. Equally, activity such as press ups, because that requires all sort of core stability and strengthening of all the pelvis area, is really going to help there. And lots of balance work. So back in the day, working in trauma orthopedics at Hull Royal. Lots of hip fractures in the elderly, predominantly because of falls, slips, trips and falls. So really working on your balance, single leg standing, moving backwards and forwards. Things like your Tai Chi, your yoga, your Pilates are really going to help with that balance side of things. But up and down hills, walking, really intense, depending on your fitness levels, intense activities such as squash. Now, squash is the most intense kind of activity, so I'm really jumping to the top of the level there, but you can work your way down as to what becomes comfortable for you. Shifting and changing position, tennis, volleyball, basketball, and then right up there into squash activities. It's a tough joint, is the hip, so anything you can do to really strengthen all of that surrounding area is really positive. Great question.
And squash is a tough game as well.
It is. 10 minutes of squash, I think, has been shown to improve your muscles, your joints, your bones, and obviously cardiovascular. I don't think I've ever seen anyone come off a squash court that isn't dripping in sweat.
100%. And coordination as well. So,
absolutely, yes.
Some brilliant questions there, everybody. So, thank you for testing us on a Tuesday morning. It is only now 2 minutes to 11, so that has flown by. So I just want to move on just to our next slide, just to walk you through just a couple of ways in which we can support you, just to wrap up today's session. We've talked about some of these already, so I will just kind of run through them quite quickly. But educational sessions, it might be nutrition webinars. That's been a real kind of underpinning factor along with our physical activity today. So it might be something around, eating well for less, because particularly when we're in a financial crisis, a lot of people will really kind of worry about eating well when they don't want it to be too costly, but also those benefits of vitamin D that we talked about earlier. We heard, obviously, Claire mentioned Phil, the physiotherapy information line. So it's a really vital information source to provide employees with that expert advice to support MSK health, including that recovery from broken bone. And then last but no least, actually using kind of management referrals to make those kind of initial referrals to support employees that may have an MSK issue, and then support that return to work program as well. So I'll just leave you with kind of our email address on the final slide here. So if you are looking for any either one-to-one support, or even some group support within your organisation, then our email address there is on the screen for you as well. So info@pamgroup.co.uk. Like I said earlier, do go on to that PAM Group website, check out the insights page. You'll be able to get access to this webinar. Obviously share it with your colleagues, but if you haven't already joined us on our previous sessions, there is a plethora of information and webinars on there for you, which you can go ahead and download. So With that, we'll wish you a really great day. Hopefully, we'll get a little bit of sunshine so we can get out and about and boost that vitamin D. So have a really, really great day, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you on the next one.
Thank you all for your time. Have a wonderful week.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.